So you all remember Humpty Dumpty, how he sat on a wall and had a great fall? And all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put him back together again. Did you ever stop to think that if Humpty Dumpty was a balloon or a football, maybe he wouldn't have gotten all busted up? Today I want to talk about a little known rule that EEO can invoke to increase the damages for certain types of cases. It's called the Eggshell Rule. Now before I go on, I want to say real quick that this week's video is an extension of last week's video on non-pecuniary harm. And I linked to it at the end of this video in case you want to go back and check that out. So if you're still with me, let's go back to the wall. And this time, let's say instead of Humpty falling off the wall, his boss pushed him. And now Humpty can't be put back together again. So Humpty sues, and his employer tells the judge, well, yeah, he got hurt pretty bad, but if he wasn't so fragile, he could have bounced right back. Surely you can't expect me to pay more damages because he's so fragile. A lot of employers will try to reduce their liability that way by trying to find something in your past, some pre-existing condition that made you weaker and more susceptible to harm. They'll try to dig through the nooks and crannies of your life and dig out all the skeletons they can find, and that process will be very unpleasant. But the good news is that it backfires a lot. Because Eggshell says it's okay that some of us are more susceptible to harm. We don't choose to be more vulnerable. We are what we are. So EEOC treats our susceptibility like they'd treat any other variable. If you run a red light and you hit a Maserati, you don't get to pay less damages because most people don't drive cars that expensive. EEOC says that employers who discriminate have to take their victims as they find us. And the long and short of it is that means your employer is liable for all the harm they do to you. They aren't responsible for the pre-existing condition itself, but EEOC recognizes that pre-existing conditions might make someone more vulnerable to harm. We'll get back to the pre-existing condition in a minute. For now, the good news is that Eggshell might qualify you for more damages. So let's look at the criteria that'll get you covered under Eggshell. First, you have to prove your employer illegally discriminated. At your hearing, you won't actually know whether you've done that or not. So for today, let's just assume that the judge has found in your favor on at least one of your claims. For Eggshell to apply, you don't need to say the word eggshell, but there are a few little things that you're going to have to address in your evidence and testimony. Thing one is that you had some pre-existing condition that made you more susceptible to harm. That diagnosis should have been included in your medical information at discovery, but if it wasn't, try to introduce it at your pre-hearing conference. If you missed introducing it yourself, there's a chance your employer may do it for you. I've had clinical depression for most of my life. Like a lot of employers, NASA disclosed my pre-existing condition for me. They tried to use it in their defense. Their basic logic was that I was mentally ill, therefore a rotten employee who didn't deserve accommodation. That's called pretext. Call it out, and it usually fails. Thing to prove number two, that any reasonable person would have been harmed by your employer's illegal actions. And again, this is super easy. Just check out what I said last week about establishing the nature of your harm, and that's basically all you have to do. Thing to prove number three is a little trickier. How much of your damage was pre-existing? Last week we talked a lot about how to paint a clear graphic picture of what you went through, enough for another person to be able to put themselves in your shoes. Besides talking about the discrimination itself, your doctor, therapist, friends and family, and you should include a snapshot of what you were like before the discrimination. Share a little about yourself. What inspired or motivated you? What did you care about or enjoy the most? What were you like socially and with your family? Now, in their testimony, friends and family should focus on observable behaviors. She used to do this before the discrimination, and now she does that. And as you talk about the discrimination, include some observable behaviors of your own. My husband talked about how, before the discrimination, we loved writing and performing songs together. But when the discrimination started to happen, and I started to withdraw, I didn't want to get on stage anymore, so we had to give up our hobby. My doctor and therapist included a behavioral baseline in their letters too. My therapist addressed my mood and behavior, and my doctor went at it from a medication perspective. And that's all you really have to do to trigger Eggshell. Prove you had the pre-existing condition and establish a behavioral baseline. If you're like me, Eggshell will relieve some of your anxiety about disclosing any of your medical information to your employer. So relax. If you have a pre-existing condition that makes you more vulnerable and your employer tries to use it against you, just call out the pretext and smile, knowing that your employer's attempt to drag you through the mud might have only succeeded in getting you more damages. Fight smart,